And so they're kind of like, nah, we did comedy, didn't really work. And so I was like, well, let me help you find the right comedians for your audience. And let's start with me because, I've done couple thousand stand-up comedy shows. I've been in some of the top festivals in North America. I've headlined Caroline's on Broadway. I've performed at the Comedy Cellar and the Hollywood Improv.
Welcome to the Accelerate Golf podcast, where we explore player improvement and the business of golf through conversations. I'm your host, Bikram Kapoor, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with Paul Ollinger, a best-selling author, host of the Reasonably Happy podcast, and a comedian with a very interesting backstory. Welcome, Paul.
Thanks, Speaker. I'm happy to be here.
So, Paul, you retired from Facebook at the age of 42 to pursue your dream of comedy. So before we get into the comedy part, let's get into the Facebook part and how you got to that point where you were able to realize a dream which millions of other Americans and people worldwide have. So why don't we start with your life story from the beginning till this point in time?
Well, I'll do it as quickly as I can so as not to bore your audience. But I grew up in a suburban Atlanta, Georgia, one of six kids in a big Catholic family. Always wanted to make a lot of money because there was the subtext of financial stress in my house. We had everything we needed, but it was always tight. My parents were Depression era parents, wonderful, wonderful people who stayed together for 55 years until my mom died. But I always wanted to make a lot of money because I thought, well, if I make a lot of money, I won't have to worry about money. And so I went to business school at Dartmouth in 1995 because I wanted to get a better job and make more money. And one night I told jokes at a talent show in front of my classmates. And I had this wild experience feeling 350 people laughing all at the same time based on something I said. And it's this narcotic wave of endorphins or dopamine or whatever it is that just lit up my brain. And I was like, oh, this is what I want to do. Stand-up comedy is my thing among all these smart people. And I was firmly entrenched in the bottom 50% of my class from an academic standpoint. But I said, among these smart people, me being funny is what makes me different, what makes me special. And so I wanted to do stand-up, but I had borrowed $80,000 in 27 years ago dollars, which would be 160 or something like that today. So I had to go get a job, and I went into the digital media business. I eventually worked at Yahoo. I quit after I paid off my student loans. I quit. I moved to LA to do stand-up comedy full time. I opened for Norm Macdonald, Kevin Nealon, Roseanne Barr, big comics. But after 2 years, I got engaged to my wife. I wanted to have a family, and I was thinking, well, maybe I should get a job again because, I need that money. And a buddy of mine from Yahoo called about that time and said, would you be interested in joining this little social media network called Facebook? And that's how I became the 250th employee of Facebook.
That's fantastic. So you were at Yahoo during the peak of the .com craziness?
No, I was at Yahoo after and kind of wave two. So, for people who are either too young to remember or haven't thought about it in a while, Yahoo, I think, started like 95, went public in 97, right about the time I was getting out of business school. The people who were there at that time made a lot of money, a lot of them anyway. And then, in 2000, 2001, the entire industry collapsed. Because there weren't real business models, there was eyeballs, but no strategy, no real way to monetize those on a long-term basis. Right. So the entire industry falls apart, and massive layoffs across the industry. Companies fold because their funding dried up and they didn't have revenue, all that kind of stuff. And they bought the company I was at, which was called Launch.com, which was a music website. Started by great guys from Minneapolis, Bob Roback and Dave Goldberg. Dave Goldberg, people might remember as being Sheryl Sandberg's late husband. Wonderful human being. But I worked for those guys, and we got picked up by Yahoo at the bottom of the .com meltdown for basically no money. But they picked us up and brought us in, and we got options priced Yahoo options price at, basically at the bottom.
The bottom.
And then from '01 to '05, under the leadership of Terry Semel, Dan Rosenswag, Greg Coleman, Wenda Harris-Millard, the company really built a strong advertising-based business model and came back, and those options appreciated significantly. And so that's how I was able to pay off my student loans over the next, 3 or 4 years.
And which year did Facebook come knocking?
2007. So I got there in May of 2007. At the time, it had about, as I said, 250 employees, 25 million monthly unique users. And when I left 4.5 years later, it had probably 4,000 employees and over 1 billion monthly unique users.
And what did you do at Facebook? Just to get the audience up to speed.
I was on the ad sales team. That's what I did at Yahoo as well. So we called on marketers, automotive marketers, Ford, Chevrolet, GM, Chrysler, whatever, Toyota, Nissan. We called on the movie studios in LA. We called on Microsoft, Visa up in San Francisco, Nike in Oregon. So we try to get their advertising dollars spent on Facebook as opposed to on TV or radio or whatever, or in addition to those things. And at the time we had very primitive ad products, but and I spent 4.5 years at Facebook, and Facebook didn't get really serious about their advertising products until after the IPO, when people were looking at their numbers and saying, you've really got to grow this thing. And shortly thereafter, Facebook developed some of the most powerful advertising products in the history of media. And
when did you leave Facebook?
I left in late 2011. I should have stuck around. But what are you going to do? I still benefited from the meaningful amount of stock options that I had, and that's what's been funding my stand-up comedy career for the last 10 or 12 years.
Fantastic. So you leave Facebook in late 2011. Facebook goes IPO, I think, mid 2012.
Correct.
I'm right. Tell us what happened in 2012 then. How did you finally break into?
Well, I'll tell you the dirty secret, which is, when you get to this point where you make some money and it's more money than you ever dreamed of, and then you go, oh, why do I need to work? I've got money. Work is all about money, isn't it? And then you quit your job and you stop getting your paycheck. But more importantly, you stop being a part of a big organization. You stop contributing to an industry that you've been a part of for a long time, and you find yourself a little bit isolated and alone, and it's a very disconcerting feeling. So I did that. I had that experience, and I actually went back to work because I moved back to Atlanta where I grew up. My parents were sick and elderly, and I wanted to be a part of taking care of them. But more importantly, I was scared to try to start comedy over again because I had failed once or quit once, however you want to call it. And I didn't really do anything for a couple of years. And I took another job back in the digital media industry, didn't go great. And after a year of doing that, I was like, you know what? If I have the opportunity, the financial wherewithal to do what I want to do, I think it's a dereliction of opportunity for me to not be pursuing the thing that I know is in my heart. Now, in those years, by the way, I had a great time. We lived right down the street from our country club in Atlanta. My golf game got a lot better in those years. I played a lot more golf.
I bet.
And I had a lot of fun. I mean, I enjoyed my time. But what was weird, it's like, if you're not working towards something, you're not really doing anything. And so we all need a through line to our life. And, something that we're working on, for long-term goals that inform what we should do every day. And as much as I love golf, I think unless you're really going to dedicate yourself to it, it's not enough to make for a complete life. It's a wonderful component of a complete life, but it's not enough in and of itself to keep you healthy and happy and moving forward as a human being.
Correct. Especially, most of us are recreational golfers, so you can make that a big part of your life. But you're right, that's not the end all and be all for somebody who's been performing at a high level, being part of a bigger organization, a bigger goal. Correct. Then tell us, what was your first break? You've performed subsequently in more than 30 different country clubs across the country. How did you get your first gig at a country club?
Well, by the end of this year, we will have produced 40 shows at country clubs
Wow.
around mostly around the Southeast, but I'm breaking into some clubs up here in the Northeast as well. You know, I started doing comedy again in 2014, and there are clubs in Atlanta, specifically the Laughing Skull Lounge, which gave me the opportunity to do hundreds of shows within a few years. And I really started to get better I got my chops back. I got better. I improved. And as a comic, you're always thinking, okay, well, who do I serve? Who's really my audience? Who appreciates what I have to say? And to be frank, I'm a 56-year-old successful middle-aged golfer, white guy, and the audiences that seem to appreciate what I have to say look and sound a lot like me. And I also noticed that country clubs have these great built-in facilities and great built-in audiences, and they're always looking for a way to provide great experiences for the members. And comedy is just not one of those things that they think about, because a lot of clubs have been burnt by comedy in the past. Somebody comes in and either tells a bunch of really filthy jokes, or equally as likely and almost as unsatisfying, they come in and they tell a bunch of boring jokes because they don't want to offend anybody. And so they're kind of like, nah, we did comedy, didn't really work. And so I was like, well, let me help you find the right comedians for your audience. And let's start with me, because, I've done a couple thousand stand-up comedy shows. I've been in some of the top festivals in North America. I've headlined Caroline's on Broadway. I've performed at the Comedy Cellar and the Hollywood Improv. Like, I'm not famous and I'm not the greatest comedian in the world, but I'm pretty damn good. And I know the country club lifestyle. These people are my friends. It's me. And so I come in there and we prove the value of doing comedy, because then people go, oh my God, that was amazing. Why don't we do more of this? And I'm like, I can help you do this. And so, the thing I wanted to do is not just pick the right comedians, but it's mostly in ballrooms. And what you don't want to have is the members come in there and it's some guy with a, little speaker standing in the corner on some, rug. What we did was, we're going to go in there, we're going to spend money on production. So there's a stage, there's drapery behind the curtain, behind the stage, so it looks like a theater. We set the room up right. So we pack the members in, we have professional sound and lighting, and people walk into the ballroom and they go, oh, this looks very different. This is going to be a different kind of thing. And so I really wanted people to feel like they were having a theater or a comedy club experience right in their home facilities, where, by the way, they don't have to look for parking. They know the people they're going to be seated next to. They're going to get the drinks poured the way they like them. So it's a new experience in a familiar environment. And these shows have been absolutely exceptional. And I've brought some of the best comedians from New York and LA to these clubs in Atlanta and Nashville and now Long Island, later this month in Long Island. And it's a lot of fun. It's super gratifying to produce these shows.
Yeah, and I like the strategy of elevating your product to, deliver the best quality as you can to that audience. So you knew the audience is in a very familiar and happy place. You go in there, deliver a quality product. And who did you talk to? Like, is it the general manager of the club you have to approach to get the first, or the show or something like that?
Well, every club is different. It works best when you have a trusted person who can advocate for us inside the club. So sometimes that's an influential board member who will introduce us to the entertainment chair, or the director of membership services, or the assistant general manager. And you come in and say, you want to earn their trust to say, I want you. Management is in a tough position, because on the one hand, they're charged with creating new and innovative experiences for members. On the other hand, people like it the way it's always been. And all it takes is one or two very frustrated members to ruin, the staff or the management's week or month. And so I don't ever want to put them in that position. And I want them to know that I appreciate that. So I say, we're going to create a comedy experience for your adult members that is going to be legit, and it's going to be fun. And yeah, maybe there'll be a few bad words uttered on the stage, but we're not going to talk about religion. We're not going to talk about politics. And those are the things that people really get upset about. It's less like dirty stuff, even though I'm like, look, it's not going to be filthy. It might be a little naughty, but we're going to have a grown-up experience in your ballroom, and they're going to leave super happy. And I've had, management tell me this is the, top 10 events they've ever seen in terms of member feedback in a decade plus of producing events. And so, I want to earn the trust of management so that when we're going in there, we're not talking about doing a one-off show. We're talking about doing the first show to prove a concept that they're going to want to do a couple of times a year in perpetuity.
That's great. So how big is your team and how long is the show?
Oh, well, my team is me and a friend who helps produce some of the stuff, who is a friend of the family, and a young woman who's kind of does a lot of the admin stuff for me. But when we book a show, generally there's a headliner. Most of these headliners have appeared on The Tonight Show or on Comedy Central or on Netflix or some combination thereof. There's a host that does, and once I've headlined a club, I then become the host. And so I'll do 10 or 15 minutes up front. There'll be a middle act that does 15 or 20 minutes, and then the headliner will do 40 or 45. So the show's anywhere from an hour 15 to an hour and a half.
Okay. And then, just like the sales formula, you figured out how to sell the product to the country club management, and then you try to replicate it as efficiently as possible to other country clubs around the region, right?
Well, the managers of these top clubs, and these clubs that we're working at are some of the clubs that some people would be like, wow, they're doing comedy at that club. I thought that was one of those very stiff, not fun places to be a member. But, those are the places that they're actually a lot of fun, and they do a lot of cool different events. Now, you have to be sensitive to their history and their ethos, but they're a lot of fun. But management at these different clubs, they all know each other, because when you start out, you start out in member services or wherever you start out, or in food and beverage, and then you go over to another club, and then you're the AGM, and you go someplace else and you're the GM. So I really try to be consistent and say, like, this is the model we use. I'm going to treat you the same as I treat the other club. I'm not going to play favorites, but this is the model. I want to work with you to make it a success. If there's, some special thing that we need to accommodate for, we'll work with you to make it happen. But, when you start seeing people move from one club to another, I'm doing a new club in August, and that came about because the new GM at that club was the AGM at our old club.
Okay.
So, or you hear people, sometimes club members will bring guests who belong to other clubs, and they say, hey, we want to do this at our club. And so then they introduce you to their club, and you never know what's going to happen. I'm doing friends of ours belong to a club in the greater Phoenix area. I won't mention exactly which one, but I'm in conversation with them about doing a show in the fall. And so it becomes kind of a word of mouth thing.
Got it. Well, it sounds like you're on to something, and people are really enjoying that.
It's a lot of fun.
Spreading.
It's a lot of fun, man.
That's great. And it's fascinating. The business of golf has so many different facets to it, from, let's say, the equipment suppliers to the golf coaches, instruction, the course maintenance, the membership, and then the entertainment, right? So
yeah,
it's different things. And I'm so happy to have you on this podcast highlighting a facet of golf, the business of golf, which we haven't explored before.
Well, it's entertainment is part of the club lifestyle, and I'm happy to play my part therein. I'm truly grateful for the opportunity to be a part of these shows, because they're just so much fun. And it's when you feel like, oh, this is the right product for the right audience, then you feel good about yourself.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about your other endeavors, which you've been very successful with. You have a podcast which has been phenomenal. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Of course.
So, it's called the Reasonably Happy Podcast.
Yeah.
But I believe, wasn't the name Crazy Money
Yeah, it
prior?
started. I started, and it's incredible to think that I've been doing it for 6 years now, and we've done 250 something episodes. And so, um, I have this mantra is like, uh, uh, find something worth doing, do it for the right reasons, and keep doing it. And that's I'm doing this for the right reasons, which are the intrinsic motivation to get smarter and meet great people. And yeah, as this podcast proves, you can meet people you'd never otherwise stumble into and have meaningful conversations that you otherwise wouldn't through a platform like podcasting. So I started it called Crazy Money back in 2019, and my buddy and I, who started it, he was the producer. We picked Crazy Money because we couldn't think of anything better, without thinking that it would probably be the name of the podcast for 5 years. The idea was to explore the connection between money and happiness. And this weird experience that I had had at Facebook, where I had made more money than I ever dreamed of, but then found myself going like, why don't I feel as satisfied as I thought I would feel? Because isn't the goal to make a lot of money and then not do anything? Well, in fact, that's not the goal. The goal is to have enough money to enable you to do the kinds of things in life that you find satisfying, that give you the freedom to serve others in a way that is an expression of yourself. But you don't hear it put that way, when you're reading the entertainment news. It's all about make money, buy Ferraris, whatever. So I explored that, and I met a lot of great people, incredible people, in fact. LL Cool J and Stevie Van Zandt from I had Rich Beam, the former PGA, or the PGA champion from, I think,
Right.
2002, who is a big time character. He's been on the podcast twice. I got to play golf with him in Austin when I was out there for a comedy show one time. That was a big thrill. Of course, I shot 110. I had a fever and couldn't see the ball. But anyway, still fun. And Rich is a buddy I can text every once in a while. So I've met incredible people doing it. But at a certain point, I was getting pitches from publicists who were saying, I've got a client who can help you make money in your sleep, help you make millions in real estate while you sleep. And I was like, Crazy Money is sending the wrong message. That's not what this has ever been about.
Right.
And so and the reason why I want to talk to Rich, for example, is like, what happens when athletes are a perfect example of this. A buddy of mine here in New York is a former NFL player, is doing stand-up comedy. He played for 10 years in the NFL, but he retired at 32. Well, what the hell are you going to do with yourself at 32 when your best professional years are behind you? How do you create a sense of self and a mission or a purpose that can even compare to making millions a year under the bright lights? With Rich, with Beamer, he wins two tournaments, then shocks the world by prevailing over Tiger Woods in the 2002 PGA Championship. Does this, and that's the highlight of his career, because he suffers some injuries and he doesn't win again on tour, and his career starts to sort of list. And it's like, man, how do you handle that? Where do you find the pride in your sense of self? And we talked about that, and you've got to find meaning outside of the accolades, or outside of the big paychecks, because otherwise you won't be a very productive or happy person. And so that's what led to me changing the name to Reasonably Happy. And it also is a peek at my psyche, where I'm kind of a grumpy. I'm a pretty positive person. Like, my optimism and belief that hard work would lead to success has been a big driver in my life since I was a kid. But I'm also kind of grumpy, and I'll complain a lot about a lot of stuff. And so Reasonably Happy is me saying, like, look, you can live a pretty productive life while recognizing that life isn't perfect, and that accepting that is a big part of actually achieving happiness.
So, just as a side note, I remember watching Rich Beam, play that round, the final round.
Yeah.
And I do remember that little jig he did after he sank the winning putt. So, and I used to think, what a character. And, I wish the best for him. But unfortunately, he didn't win again. But, he's doing a great job with Sky. Right?
Yeah, but that's golf too, man. I mean, look at the guys that how few people win more than once on tour. How many guys win more than one major? you know. And even among these very, very elite golfers, the people who have sustained success. I mean, Scotty's doing something that hasn't been done since Tiger Woods. But
Right.
if you look at, like, and this is non-scientific, and I'm not the most informed golf analyst or data scientist, but like, if you think about the guys that over the last 15 years, John Rahm, Dustin Johnson, Jason Day, they hit Jordan Spieth. They hit these 18-month or 2-year like streaks, and they're not sustainable for whatever reason. That's how competitive golf is. These guys who are just incredible golfers, to stay at the top of the game is so difficult, that very, very few people have done it. And Scotty looks like the first guy since Tiger to do it for more than a few years at a time.
And now, folks, I wanted to mention that this show is brought to you by Q School Sports, a technology company that offers thoughtfully designed point-of-sale, bookings, payments, omni-channel retail, and customer management software that accelerates your business growth. Visit qschoolsports.com for more information. Thank you.
So, over the course of all these guests who've appeared on the Reasonably Happy podcast, has there been something you've really learned, and what has stood out for you? Is there anything common in all the conversations you've had with all these different successful people?
I mean, what is eye-opening is how much it all comes down to a few basic things. Like, one of the things, when I started reading about money and happiness, one of the things that struck me is that, and there's been tons and tons of data and research done on these kinds of things, that we judge our success and our happiness relatively as opposed to in the absolute. People are happier making $80,000 a year in an environment where the average salary is $60,000, as opposed to making $120,000 a year where the average income is $140,000 a year. And that's kind of perverse if you think about it.
Yeah.
Right. And so we're always comparing ourselves to others. We are tribal beings, and our place in the hierarchy is a strong determinant of our happiness and feeling of security. There's the old Teddy Roosevelt saying that comparison is the thief of joy. And I think that is absolutely correct. And what was interesting to me was, well, there's a lot that was interesting, but when I quit Facebook, I got to a point where I realized I had enough money to belong to the country club I aspired to as a kid, to send my kids to private school, to have a nice house, and to take some nice vacations every year. And what happens, though, is when you join that country club, you start hanging out with guys who belong to 3 or 4 country clubs. And they don't just have the house on the nice street in their primary residence. They have a mountain house and a lake house. And the more you start hanging out with rich people, your definition of rich keeps changing. And there's no end to that. And if one is not aware to say, I have what I need, and what I have is enough, we will never be satisfied. That, there's been studies, and I interviewed a guy from Harvard Business School, Mike Norton, who, along with a woman named Liz Dunn from the University of British Columbia, wrote a book called Happy Money. I also interviewed a guy named Sir Angus Deaton, who was an economist at Princeton University, still is, I believe. He wrote a study that's been widely quoted, that there's he co-authored it with Daniel Kahneman, who's was a very famous
Yep.
Nobel laureate economist. And their study determined that there's no additional happiness after $75,000 a year in income. Meaning, once our basic needs are satisfied, our desires sort of plateau. Well, that's not actually true, but the way I think about it is, if you're making under $75,000 a year, every incremental $75,000 is relieving pain. But there's an inflection point past which those incremental dollars are just doing nice things. Like, upgrading from a Lexus to a Mercedes isn't an existential benefit. It's
Right.
nice, but it's not an existential benefit. When you upgrade from a junker that doesn't have air conditioning in the Southeast in summertime to a car that has air conditioning, your life gets measurably better, right? Well, Norton and Dunn came in and said, well, millionaires don't fill out surveys. So what happens to what is that path for happiness for millionaires? And they found that even multimillionaires, they asked the question, how happy are you on a scale of 1 to 10? And what would it take for you to get to a 10? And almost all of them said, twice as much as I have. We all want twice as much as we have. I've got a lot of great stuff. You know what I want? I want a jet, or at least a NetJets card. I want to stop going to the big airport, right? But there's no end to that. And unless we stop and say, you know what? I'm good. I like the $20 bottle of wine just fine. I don't need to drink the $50 bottle of wine except on special occasions. Or I like this daily fee course that I can play pretty regularly. I know the guys in the pro shop, they're good guys. I don't have to join this prestigious golf club to impress my friends or my family or to have a play. Like, I'm going to be happy with what I have. I don't need to get new club. I don't have to have the latest driver every season. I can play with something that's a few years old and I'll upgrade when I can. Like, there's no end to wanting.
Yeah.
Even
No,
among affluent people.
you wrote a book also called Reasonably Happy.
I did.
And so talk to us about that.
Look, I have a copy right here.
That's perfect.
It's so this is a collection of essays, and so I really put it out because I wanted to have something to sell after comedy shows, so people can take something away and maybe remember who I am and maybe share. I think a lot about these things, and these are essays, 46 essays from my Substack, words.paulollinger.com, where I write about these kinds of observations about life, about work, about success, about golf sometimes, and I just kind of reflect on, the ways we trip ourselves up, hopefully in a way that is self-aware and thought-provoking, but also funny. And the feedback I've gotten has been very positive.
I know in there, in your collection of essays, there is one about driving a beater, a junker, in the heat of the South, and then finally upgrading to a Saturn. So talk to us about that.
Oh yeah. So that metaphor that I talked about is it's a lesson directly from my personal life. So I was 25 years old, living in Memphis, Tennessee, making $25,000 a year. I'd already gotten myself into credit card debt through a variety of mistakes that 22-year-olds, 24-year-olds make. And then, I had a car that I bought right after college. It was a used Honda. I didn't take care of it. Predictably, it broke down all the time. I started getting mechanics bills, adding up. And I got to the point where every morning when I was waking up, I was thinking about my bills before I even brushed my teeth,
Wow.
And that's a terrible trap to be in. And sadly, most of America is in that trap. And so I reflected on, I remember I had no air conditioning in Memphis, Tennessee. If you've never been to Memphis, it's like New Orleans. It is the most humid, uncomfortable place in the summertime that you can imagine. And not having air conditioning as a young single man basically meant I wasn't going to have a girlfriend or any shot to take dates out in a way that was going to give me a chance to be romantically successful at all. And I got a promotion at work. I paid off some bills. And I bought a car, a 1994 Saturn SL2. And years later, looking back on it, having driven Audis and Lexuses, Lexi and Mercedes, like I said before, upgrading from one nice car to another is just like, hey, that's nice, But upgrading from a beater that doesn't start half the time and worrying about what that ping in the engine means, and not having air conditioning and being humiliated by picking up girls and not being able to turn the air conditioning on because you can't afford to get it fixed. That's a terrible feeling. And then when you upgrade to a car, it's not sexy. The Saturn SL2 was a piece of junk. It was a moped, four-wheeled moped. It was not a nice car, but it started. It had air conditioning. It wasn't going to break down. And that to me was an existential shift in my life that made my life better. And that's why when you're younger, an extra $5,000, an extra 10 grand can change your life. Whereas later on in life, you know, our appetites have grown so much that we can't see the difference between our wants and our needs. And we take for granted things that would change the life of people who have much, much less than we do.
And then in that collection of essays, you also have a very nice essay called Nightmare on the Back Nine. So talk to us about that.
It's actually a recurring dream that I have. I haven't had it for a while though, which is interesting. But it's this nightmare where I'm on the tee box and I've teed my ball up, and I'm standing over the ball, but I can't swing. That for some reason my arms are frozen, and the ball I go to address the ball and the ball falls off the tee, and I tee it back up, and then I address it again, and I can't swing, or I swing and I miss it by, a foot over the ball. And my playing partners are all kind of behind me looking at each other going like, what's going on? And they've all hit their shots, and eventually they sort of wander forward without me, but there I am stuck on the tee. I think it's a metaphor for, the fear of not of being left behind, or death. Obviously it's a feeling of powerlessness, that somehow manifests through the lens of golf. We're all going to die at some point. Or if we live long enough, we're going to outlive our ability to play golf. And so it's a realization that the number of rounds we have in our lives is finite. And so productively interpreted, it means, make the most of every round that you've got and enjoy it. And because, someday you're not going to be able to play at all, let alone hit the ball as far as you're hitting it right now.
That's so true. And on that theme, there is one last essay I would like to refer to in your book, and that is, swing the freaking bat.
Yeah. That essay is about watching my son play baseball, and I think I wrote it during the pandemic. My son was he's sort of late to sports, and he enjoyed being a part of the team on baseball, but he was timid at the plate. And he realized that most of the time, if he just took 4 pitches or 7 pitches from the pitcher, he could get a base on balls. And of course, the coaches, to their credit, were always encouraging him to swing, because it's not about getting a base on balls and maybe getting a run. It's about proving, as whatever he was, 7, 8 years old at the time, that that if you swing, you can get a hit, that you are empowered, that you have agency, and that kind of thing. And I was in the dugout. I was like the 4th string dad. I myself am not qualified enough to give any baseball coaching, but I can carry a lot of equipment from the car to the dugout. So that's the role I played. And I was in the dugout. My son was at bat, and he was taking these balls, and I just said, "Swing the effing bat." And some kid overheard me, and I had to lie to him about what I said. Of course, he didn't believe me. But it's really about, like, yeah, take that swing, man. I mean, because the things in life that I regret are the shots I didn't take. The girl I didn't kiss, the fumble that I fell on instead of picking it up and running it into the end zone, which happened against our rivals in 1986. And yes, I think about it once a month, 45 years later, whatever it is, 35. And yeah, so that's what it was about. It was about, like, man, we got to learn to take risks and be okay striking out. And I think that's what comedy is for me. It's, I'm minimizing deathbed regrets. I didn't want to get, having earned a sufficient amount of money to where I don't have anything to prove to anybody else. I've got enough money to get my kids raised through college, my bills paid, all that kind of stuff, which I'm wildly fortunate to have. But the deathbed regret I'm now trying to minimize is not thinking, well, what would have happened if I gave it my all,
Right.
with reference to my creative career. And having given this 12 or 13 years of my life, I feel like I'm giving it my all. I'm not going to have that regret. What happens from here, sort of outside my control. But I'm going to keep swinging the bat. And that this all plays right back to golf. Like, you're in control of the process. you're in control of doing your best. And you can hit a great drive that hits off a sprinkler head and goes into the water, or you can hit a crappy drive and this happened yesterday. I hit a big slice and it was headed OB, but it bounced off a tree and went back into a bunker, and it was par 5, and I was on the green in regulation and 2-putted for a par. And so you got to take the good with the bad and try to try to be a goldfish and not worry too much about what's happened and just keep moving forward.
Wonderful talking to you, Paul. It was so nice to hear about your history, your attitude. It's so infectious. I'm going to read that book cover to cover, reasonably happy. As you can see, I've already sampled a few essays and I loved it.
Appreciate it, man. I appreciate you checking it out, Bikram, and thanks for having me on the show.
Thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, that's a wrap for today. Thank you for listening.
In audio.